Hey, everybody. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Chapter 2, some of the review information here. Remember, we're starting off on my website, Rockin' Math 7. We're going to go ahead and look at the student textbook here. We are in Chapter 2, Lesson 2.1, Rational Numbers. So rational numbers, as we're going to see right here, number that can be written as the ratio of two integers. I like simply saying it is a fraction. So can you change that number that you see, whatever form it is, into a fraction? Now remember, if it's a nice whole number or an integer, you can simply put a 1 underneath it. But if it's in a different form, like a decimal or so on, we're going to go ahead and practice some of our skills in changing it back and forth, if you will. All right, so let's see here. Let's scroll down to the actual lesson. I'll do a few problems on my pen tablet to help you out. So let's see. We got terminating decimals, normal decimals, repeating decimals. Remember that little piece of that bar? I like to see that up there at the top. All right, so at the beginning, it wants us to be able to take an mixed number or a regular fraction or maybe even an improper fraction and simply change it into a decimal. So we set up our elementary division there. And I'm going to go ahead and help you set out or do a few problems with the on your own. So very similar to the assignment and then eventually the assessment. So let's go ahead and switch over here to the review lesson 2.1 information. And here we go, on your own. So for number 1, we obviously know that it is going to be a negative answer. I'm going to go ahead and set up my division where the numerator goes inside and the denominator outside. So since it is an improper fraction, it's definitely going to start off with a negative 1 point something because 5 and 6 definitely work. Let me zoom in, help out our, like we say, vision challenged friends. So 5 times 1 is 5. Now again, it may be some basic elementary skills here. My own kids, I asked them to put the zeros here. We've got 0, 0, 1. And I go ahead and look at the 10. Well, basic there, right? Because 5 times 2 is 10. So I could stop right there. So my answer, remember, is going to be negative 1.2. I have changed my improper fraction into a decimal answer here. Just going to go ahead and do one more real quick, number 2. We know that it's going to start with negative 7, so that means my answer is going to be negative 7 point something. And then again here, I'm going to go ahead and take my numerator. I always just put 2 zeros there, and then my denominator on the outside. Bring up my decimal. 8 and 3 do not work. 8 and 30 does work. 8 times 4 is 32, so that's a little bit too much, but 8 times 3 is 24. Put the extra 0 there. I subtract. Going to give me 60. 3 times 7, oh sorry, 8 times 7 is 56. I'm going to go ahead and put an additional 0 there. So it's really going to give me a 40. 8 times 5 is 40, so I can go ahead and recognize that I do have a terminating decimal. So I got negative 375. Now remember, a repeating decimal, if that's the case, then you're just going to go ahead and figure out the pattern. Is it like a 626262, and then you're going to use the bar over both digits, or maybe it's a single digit that's repeating, a 0.333, just put a 0.3 with the bar repeating, and so on. Beautiful. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some more information here. All right, as you progress, you're going to go ahead and realize, okay, well, I got to go the other direction or the other way and take my decimal and change it into a fraction. But again, it's got to be in simplest form, which means we may have to reduce it, which is a pretty common thing to do in 7th, 8th grade, and even in high school. So we know it's either a negative or positive, and then we just go ahead and practice our place value. So for example, at number 5, this is my 10th place, so it's got a 10 for my denominator. I cannot reduce that at all, so the last thing I have to do to finish it off is simply put the negative sign. On number 6, I've got tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So I've got 125 over 1,000. 1,000. This one can definitely reduce. I'm going to go ahead and figure out what that's going to be. Now, most of you can say, well, it's probably going to go ahead and divide by 5. You can try that style. 125 divided by 5 is 25. 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. But sometimes if we stop too early, we may have to remember, you know what? I got to continue to divide. So if you notice here, I can go ahead and talk about my quarters. 25 divided by 25 is 1, and 200 divided by 25 is going to be 8. So I've got 0.125, and that converts or changes into a 1/8. Now remember, it doesn't matter if there is an integer here, so this is going to be -3 and your fraction, 1/10. Stop there. This one would be -10 and 25/100. But we can go ahead and change that into -10 and 1/4. Now again, if you didn't know that, you can just go ahead and divide by 5, or maybe even better yet, by 25. So now that we have our conversion hopefully practiced, what we might have to do is, on some of your problems, you might have to go ahead and put them in the correct order. Now, if you remember, some of you unfortunately missed some problems on this on your assessment, because when you put them in order from least to greatest, you are going to use your original form here. So for example, on the odd problems again, at number 29, you're going to go ahead and say, you know what, I think it's a little bit easier for me, probably for you as well, to put them all into decimal form. So for example, -4/5, what is the decimal form of that? Go ahead and change it. And then you're going to go ahead and figure out from least to greatest using the decimal idea. But when you write your final answer, remember to use your original form here. Now, the last thing I want to go ahead and remind you about is the quick comparison. Now, comparison, again, you could actually have it in either form, but most students prefer it to be in decimal form. So if you notice this one here, maybe it's a little bit difficult for some of you to see, but that is a -5 point. And again, since it's repeating, it's really just a bunch of 2's. So for this one, I need to be able to compare it and find out what the decimal form of that is. So I'm going to come over here. Again, my 3 is my numerator. 11 is my denominator. 11 and 3 does not work. So it's going to be a 2, so that kind of makes sense. So 11 times 2 is 22. Subtract that gives me an 80. And that's going to be a 7. You know what? I don't think I need to go any further because obviously they're not that close when we look at the decimals there. But one thing I need you to remember is since they are both negative, the comparison for, the good old inequality is if it was a positive, this one would be greater, the 0.27. But since it's a negative, this one is actually greater. So we read it as -5.27 is less than -5.22222, and so on. So we can go ahead and say less than in our original form there. So compare them, preferably when they are both in your decimal form there. All right, so for your assignment, you've got some odds. Remember, I showed you how to check your answers from the actual website. It's that review down at the bottom left on the actual page. Let's go ahead and look at that again one more time. It is right here, selected answers. So you just go ahead and bring it up. 2.1. Beautiful. All right, be awesome, superstars. Do your best.